Hello and welcome to this tutorial where we're going to create a new block using Blazor. So we will make it all from scratch and we will just start with a simple Blazor server app. We will also use MS SQL and handle the database by using Entity Framework. Then we will set up some authentication with identity so that you can create a user, and finally we will also make some features for the user so they can go and comment on the posts that is on the blog. I will try to keep it as simple as possible because when you have a project like this, then it can easily get out of hands with features that you want to include. And the purpose of this video is actually just to show you how you can make the most basic block inside Blazor. So let's go and create a new project. I'll just right click Visual Studio so we can open the start page here. I then want to create a new project and this should be a Blazor server app. So I'll hit next. Then we want to call this for my new block and let's just hit next. And in this case we're going to use .NET 7. You could also just use .NET 6. This is the long-term support, but I want to use the .NET 7 for this project. If you do want to use the .NET 6 version, then just choose that. I will say to you when we install the NuGet packages which one that you have to install instead. So now let's just go and say create. We don't want to authenticate right now because I will just scaffold this inside the project. So in this case we can just say create. So I have not really created this project before I made this video, so we will just take everything as they come. And when we have to think about what data we are going to use in the database, then I actually just want to tell ChatGPT to generate some random articles for us, just so we have some templates that we can play with. But first of all, let's go and install some NuGet packages that we're going to need in this project. So let's right click the project. And then we say manage NuGet packages. We then want to go to browse, and in the search bar you want to search for Entity Framework Core so that you get these packages. So the first package we're going to install is this Entity Framework Core, and inside the versions, if you choose the .NET 6 version, then go and choose the newest 6 version for Entity Framework Core. But else, if you just follow along here, then take the newest .NET 7 version for Entity Framework Core and then say install. Then we want to say accept. And we also want to install this Entity Framework Core.SQL server. And this is to actually go and connect to our MS SQL server. So we also want to install the newest here. Again, if you have .NET 6, choose the newest 6 version and say I accept. So the next thing is that we also want to include this Entity Framework Core tools. And what this package is allow us to do is that we can add migrations and update the database so that we later on can just create some models over in our data folder that we then can migrate, so they're going to be tables in our MS SQL database. So let's go and install these tools. And again, if you have .NET 6 version, go and choose the newest 6 instead and say I accept. So now we need to create a DB context file so that we can actually create the connection to the database. And I'll go and expand the data over here, and I will actually go and delete these two weather forecasts. But when we do that, there will come some errors because they're also included in some of the pages. So actually just let them be for now. But inside the data folder, let's go and right click, say add, and say new item, and let's call this for app db context. You can call it whatever you want, you just have to remember that this is your db context file. And let's say add. And when we have a db context file, we want to extend from db context just like this. And if it doesn't recognize it, then just hover over, say alt enter, and then we want to use the Microsoft Entity Framework Core. So inside the Framework Core library here, we have a class called DB Context that we can extend from. So now all the functionality that is included in the DB context is now also in our app DB context. So now we can go and override some of the configurations and add some tables to the database. But before we do anything inside our app DB context, let's go to the app settings.json file, because it is from in here we want to include our connection string to the database so that we don't have it directly inside our app DB context. So now just included the connection string. I set this comma after the allowed hosts so that we could create a new attribute inside this JSON file, and we want to call it connection strings. And this is actually the place where we can add all our connection strings. So as you can see, this is an array now, or it's actually an object where we can say we have a key and we have a value, and you can just say comma here if you want to have some other connection strings and just add new connection strings. But in this case, we have a value called web API database, and I just copy and pasted this, so I don't really want to call it for that, so we can call it maybe database connection instead. And then we can see here we need to have a server name. So in this case, they just say my server address. We want to have our own server name. Then they have a database name. So in this case, they just say my database, and then they say trusted connection. And that's actually just when we use this locally, then we know that this is a trusted connection. So this should actually just be our credentials to log into the database. But now let's go and open the SQL Server Management Studio. And actually one thing I forgot to mention in the beginning of this video is that you can use whatever SQL technology that you want to use. You could use MySQL or PostgreSQL. Then of course you just have to know what NuGet package and how to create the connection should look like. But if you do that, then you can still follow along in this video, because once Entity Framework is set up, it really doesn't matter what database you're connected to. But this is our server name. The desktop is, in my case, there's UL and some other characters. So I'll just go and copy and paste this whole line. And let's put it into our connection string where the server have to be. So now that I have the server name, let's go and create a new database so we can take the name of the new database and put in here. So let's go back to SQL Server Management Studio and just connect. And inside our databases, you can see I have a lot of databases, but we do want to right click on databases and say new database. Then we want to say this is our block. So let's just call the database block DB. So we say okay. And now we can actually go back to Visual Studio. So we can take this my database and say block DB instead. So now we should be set up. If there come some errors, then I will tell you how we fix it. So now we can go back to our app.db context. And the first thing we will do is to override our onConfiguring method. So you have to remember that this onConfiguring is actually coming from the DB context. So now we say that we want to override it from the DB context. So we can use this options to create the new connection to our MS SQL server. And by doing that, we say options, and then we say .use SQL server. And inside here, we want to have the connection string that we just created in the app settings.json. And to get that, we actually want to dependency inject what's called an I configuration. So now I just added this code. We have a local variable that we can use, and we can set it protected and read only, because we only have to read from it. We don't have to do anything inside it. So this is just to be a little bit more safe with our code. We then say that this configuration variable should be an I configuration, but it isn't really initialized with any values, because that is what we're going to do in our constructor. So this is the constructor, and we have our app.db context. And when we have the same name as the class, then this will be our constructor. And when we have our constructor, we can go and say I configuration and say configuration. So this is actually the dependency injection. We inject this I configuration inside our app.db context. And to make it available for the whole class, then we're going to set the I configuration inside this constructor method equal to configuration. That is our global variable. I actually think I called this local variable, but it is our global variable inside this class, so that we can go and use this configuration everywhere on the page. And that's exactly what we're going to do, because we're going to use the configuration inside our use SQL server. And then we can say dot and say get connection string. And as you can see, when we hover over this connection string, you can see it's a shorthand for get section connection strings, and then the name that we have inside our connection strings. So when you use this get connection string instead of the get section, then it's important that we call the attribute in our app settings for connection strings just exactly as it is here, because then it will go and look inside the app settings inside the connection strings, and then we have to give it the name of which connection string we want to feed to the SQL server. So let's go and copy this database connection, and then we go to app.db context again, and say that this is the name of the connection string that we want to use. So the next part from here is to actually create some posts or some articles. So I think we want to call it for posts. So to create a new table, we have to use this db set, because then it will create a new table for us. And it will use this model inside here. And because this db set is a generic type, you can see in here it takes a t entity. So it will be able to take another class, or actually just another model inside this type. But of course we haven't created this post model yet. But then we also want to say that this is the posts. In this case, I think it's most logic just to have an S on it, because this is where our post is, and this is what the table is going to be called. So now let's hover over the post and hit Alt Enter, because then we can see here we can generate type post, and then just go and click generate class post in new file. So now it created this post.cs inside our data folder. We can then go and say prop and then hit tab twice. This will create a new property for us, and the first one is an int. That's okay, because the first one is going to be an ID. The second one is going to be a string. And let's say that the post should have a title. And actually let's just go and say Control D twice, because then we duplicate the line. And let's go and say that we also want to have a introduction. So this will just be an introduction text, you know, like under the article you have a short introduction to the article, and finally you have the whole article. I'm really no layout expert, so I think you might want to call these some different things, maybe headline and subheadline, I don't know. But for this project I'll just stick to title, introduction, and let's say that we have, let's call it for body text. So now when that's done, let's go and see if we can create this model as a table in our database. So we want to go to the package manager console, then we want to say add migration, and we should give this a name. So let's call it for create underscore post underscore table, and hit enter. So now we get this migration file where it says that when it's up, and that means when we push it or we migrate it, then it will run the up method. And we also have a down method, so when we roll this back, this migration, it will just drop the post table. But as we can see in this case, it will create a post table, it will create an ID, and it knows that this is the identity and that we're going to use this as a primary key, and then it will add the title, introduction, and body text. We can also see that it created this migrations folder, and this migrations folder is just so that Entity Framework can keep track of the migrations that we created. So this create post table, and it also have a timestamp. This is actually this file, and then it will also, when we migrate this the first time, it will also create this migrations as a table in our database. It will call it, I think it's EF migrations, so Entity Framework migrations. But now when we can see that we have the migration file that we want to use, we can just go and say update, and we say update database, and hit enter to see if this works. If it doesn't work, then we will solve the issue. And we do actually get a connection error, like something to do with the login process. So if we go back to the app settings.json, we might need to have some credentials instead of just this one. So I actually just asked ChatGPT to see what's wrong. As you can see here, I have this conversation where I say, this is my connection string. I just give it the connection string, and this is the error. And I'm using Entity Framework, and then it gives me a description of what I can do. So I could try to put this trust server certificate to true inside our connection string. So I'll just try that. So let's go and say update database again, and this time it just ran smoothly. So it applied the migration, and it said that it is done. And this was just a very good example on how powerful ChatGPT can be. Not that this was specifically complicated, but I could maybe have sit and been looking for this solution in some hours maybe, but ChatGPT just helped me instantly. But now when the migration is done, let's go to our SQL Server Management Studio, and let's just update, click on this refresh icon on when we mark our blockdb, and let's expand it and see the tables. And now we can see we have a post table And we also have the Entity Framework Migrations History table. But of course, we're not going to do anything inside that. We only have to look at our post table. So you can right click it and say design. And in here we can see we have an ID, which is an int, and it's our primary key. And we have the title, introduction, and body text. So what I want to do now is to add some rows to this table. So let's go and make a new query. And again, I just ask ChatGPT to actually create some dummy text for us. So we can just go and copy and paste this script. Let's insert it into our new query. As you can see, the blog post, it was not really what it was called. It was called posts. And then let's try to execute this. So now you can see we have 3 affected rows. So now we can go and right click on the post table again, say edit top 200 rows. And now you can see we have some dummy text. And because a article or a post might have some more text than just this, I will actually just go and say that it should create maybe 3000 letters, so we can just put them in here. So now I actually just got ChatGPT to generate some more realistic articles than what it came up with at the beginning. So now we actually do have some titles that could reflect some real posts, and also a smaller introduction text, and then a body text with over 1000 letters in each. But now that we have our data, let's go and display it on the front page. I just want to make a list of the posts that we can click on. So let's go back to Visual Studio and let's go to the front page. So right now it just have the page title, it have a header or a headline 1 and some text, and then a prompt with a title. So I will just go and delete this, and then we want to say that the page title should be my blog. And as you can see when we run it now, this is like the default page for a Blazor server app, but I actually don't want to have this menu over here. So let's go and remove this, and also remove this about button, because the only thing I want to have here is our 3 article that we're going to display. So let's go and close this. We then want to go to our shared folder and then to our main layout, because it is in here that we have our now menu. So let's just go and remove this, and also remove this about here. So remove this. It could be nice just to keep this top row maybe, because we want to create a menu in the top of our page that we can use to actually also log in when we create the possibility to log in with identity. But for now, if we just save this and look at the page again, we can now see that we actually don't have really anything right now. And that's also good, because we want to go and include the post now. So first of all, I just want to close all these tabs and go to the front page again. Then we want to go and create a new div with a class that is a container. And because Bootstrap is included in a Blazor server app when you create it, you can just go and say container. Then we already have all the CSS set up. And let's try to say that we have a h1, which is the title. So let's just say title. And then we also have a paragraph, which should be the introduction text. So let's try to see how this looks. And now you can see, because we have a container, then it will, like here, it will start the container and then it will end it over here. As you can see, if we do this, then if we expand it, you can see it will follow along because it have a responsive container now. So let's close this again. So now let's go and fetch the actual data from the database. So the first thing we will have to do is to create the code section. This is where we're going to execute all the code, where we know from a simple ASP.NET Core application, we would have a code behind file for this. But in Blazor, you can just do it directly inside the .razor file. That's also why we don't have a code behind file right now. You could create one, but you don't have to, because you can just do all the code inside the same file. And that's very convenient when you have a simple page. But before we do any coding, I just want to include our app.db context. So we say using, and we want to use the my new blog, because that's our project name. And then we want to use the data folder, because it is that folder where our app.db context is inside. So the first thing we can do is to create the variable. So let's say we have a private variable, and the type of this should be the app.db context, and then we should give it a name. So let's say underscore context. I think we can do it this way, but let's try, because if this not work, then we have to inject it instead. And as you can see here, when we try to make a new instance, it's actually want to have the I configuration also. So let's try to go and inject that. So instead of say using, then we say inject, and we have the I configuration, and then a name. Let's just call it configuration. So that is actually the same as saying that we're going to dependency inject it. So we're going to copy this and put it inside our app.db context, and right now everything looks fine. So let's try to make a list of the posts. So in this case, I just want to make it public, and then it should be a list of posts. And it's just post because it's only the model that we use. And let's go and call this for posts. And I actually don't know if we have to make it an empty list to begin with, but else we just get an error and then we will do it. But now we should be able to say that we want to have the posts, and I do think we have to make it a small or a lowercase. Not that we have to, but just so we can read it a little bit better. And then I should maybe try to stay the same way in the whole application. But now we can see that we have our posts, so we will set that equal to the context, and then we want to say inside our context we have our posts, and in this case we just want to fetch everything. So let's go and say to list, because it's a list that we want to return, and we do want to use these. And maybe I should zoom in a little bit so you can see it better. But now when the page is initialized, so when the page is loaded, it will run this method. And again, we are overriding the onInitialized async method, and we're just running it as a task so we can do it async. And in this case, we don't really return anything on the onInitialized async other than we just give the post some values. So now let's go up to our HTML, and then I think we have to say for each, and then var post in posts, and then we can make the curly brackets. So what we do here is just to loop through all the posts that we fetch from the database, and then we now have the variable called post. So we do now have the object of post every time we loop it through. So let's take our HTML and put it inside the for each loop. And then I also think that we want to make an HR. This is actually just a stroke that is going to be displayed underneath the article here. And then let's also make a break so that we have some more space between the posts. Then we want to go and say post, and when we say dot, we actually have the values now that we can choose from. So we have our title, the body text, and the introduction text. So in this case it was the title, and let's go and copy this and paste it in here, and then we can say that we have the introduction also. So let's try to see if it works. It might not work because it is not having a empty list when we start the application. And what I mean by that is that this is not initialized at all. So when it looks at this at first glance, this is not initialized. So we don't actually have anything that's called posts. But let's try to see. And I was actually wrong. So we could do it like this because now we have all the articles. Of course, this is not winning any design prizes. What I think we should also do is to add maybe a image at the side here to each article, so we can show an image, and when you click on it we also have like a big image for the article when we are inside the article. So to do that we might need to go to our model again, our post model, and add a path to an image, or actually just a name for the image that we're going to display. So let's close the application again, and let's go to our post model, and then I want to duplicate the line again, and then I actually just want to have a new column in our table that is called image, and it should also be a string because we just want to contain the file name of the image. So now we can go and migrate this change. So let's go to the package manager console and scroll down. Then we want to say add migration, and I do want to call this add image to post table, and hit enter. And as you can see, it will now add the column called image to the post table, and it will set it as an nvarchar with a max value. So that is fine. And if we would like to roll this migration back, it will just drop this column. So now let's go and say update database. And now the migration is applied to the database. So if we go inside our SQL Server Management Studio, we can still not see it here, but if we just click on the post table and we hit the update button, and let's try to open it again here. So we say edit top 200 rows. It actually doesn't look like anything happened, but let's try to close all these. Just say no. And let's try to hit the block DB and update the whole database. And then let's go to the tables again. Let's see the design of the post. And now you can see we have the image. I think it's one of the downsides by using the MS SQL database that you really have to go and refresh it all the time. If you had a MySQL database in PHPMyAdmin, you would just refresh the page and the changes would be made. But it really depends on your preferences. But now if we right click the post again, we can say edit top 200 rows, and now you can see we have the extra column to each post. So in this case, I just want to say that this is image 1, and let's say it's the JPEG, and let's just go and copy and paste this and say that this is image 2, and then also image 3. So now when that is set, we can go back to Visual Studio, and let's just close this migration file. And let's close the posts. So now when we're in here, I do actually want to use some more Bootstrap to make the layout. So we're going to say inside here that we have a new div. And we also want to close this div. That this should have a class of a row. Because what this enables us to do is that every time we have a new post, it will make a new row. And then inside this row, we also have some columns. So we can go and say class, column. And then you can see we can choose from 1 to 12. And that's because when you have a column that is 12, then it will take all the space of the row. So let's say that you set a column of 6, then you can also go and create a new div with the column of 6, and then they will actually split the row equally. So for example, let's say that the image should fill up, let's say 4. And then the text should fill up 8, and we have to make sure that it gives 12, else it will make no sense. Then we can go and take our title and introduction, and let's put it inside the column 8. And inside our column 4, we can go and put an image with a source. And right now we actually just want to go and create a new folder so that we can go to an image folder and then maybe have another folder inside called article images or article main images. So let's just do that. We go to our www root folder, and inside here we want to add a new folder, and we want to call this img for image. And inside this we also want to add a new folder, and let's just call it article main images. So now I will just find 3 images that is the same resolution. I think it's pretty good that you keep the same resolution so that you don't mess up with the layout that you created. So I'll actually just find 3 full HD images and then name them image 1, and it should be a JPEG, and image 2 should be a JPEG, and the image 3 that also should be a JPEG, so that we have an image to every article. So now I just found these 3 images, image 1, 2, and 3. I have them on my desktop, so I think the easiest way to put them in the folder is just to right click on the articles and then say open folder in File Explorer. So now we have the exact path where we have to put the images. So now we can just go and drag and drop them to the folder. So when that's done, we can just close these, and then we should be able to now say images. Oh, I can see it cannot see it. Maybe we have to just rebuild this. So let's try to see if it can see the images. It still cannot. But well, we know that the image folder is in the place. So we can just go and say image and then article, main images, and then we want to target not the files directly, because we want to have the value for the current post that is going to be printed in the HTML. So we can go and say post and then say dot, and then we say image. So now let's save this and try to run it to see how it looks. And as we can see now, it actually works, but because we haven't given the image a specific width, then it will just be displayed in full HD. So it will actually take up all my screen because I have a full HD screen. And then we also have a image that is actually a lot bigger than I thought, but we have to go and say that the image should be 100% in width, because then it will only fill up the column that has the 4 in size. So, and you can actually see if we hit F12 here and we take the select tool, we can go and see the actual columns. So if we just click on the text, you can see here we have the column 4, which is going to take up what is 4 of 12. And then we also have this column 8. And right here you can actually also see the container. So the container is just taking up the blue space, and then it will center automatically and make some margin at the sides. But let's go and close the browser again. Then I will go and make a class for this. And I actually think there is a bootstrap class called W and then 100, which will be a width of 100, and it is %, it is not pixels, so it's fine. So let's go and save it and let's see the application again. And now you can see this looks much more nice than before. So you can always go and play around with this if you want to have it look a little bit nicer than this. But what I will do now is to actually make this a link so that you can click on all this, so it will direct us to a new page where we're going to display the article. So again, let's close the browser, and I think the most simple solution here is just to create a anchor tag around the whole row, because we want the whole row to be clickable. And then we of course have to say href, and in this case we can just go and say the hashtag icon, because before we can go and actually create the URL to the article that we're creating or that we're showing, we need to make the template page for the actual article. So over in our pages folder, we want to right click, say add, and then let's create a new Razor component, because we are using Blazor. And this component we just want to call article, or actually we could also call it post, because we have our table that is called post. So let's just say add, and now we have this post page. But if we go to the index, you can see we have this page, so we know what URL we're going to connect to when we want to go into the post. So let's go and copy this and put it inside here. And first of all, we can say that we don't want to target the front page, but we want to target the articles. So we could just say article, and then we do want to have an ID to our article, so we can make these curly brackets and say ID. And then the nice thing about Blazor is that we can just make this data annotation called parameter, so that it knows that the ID comes from the parameter inside the URL. And I think it should be the same name, so let's make this a uppercase I. And actually, just to test if this works, we can go and make a paragraph and then say that this should be the ID. And then we should be able to go and see if this works manually. So let's try to open this application now, and we actually get an error, but that is from the index.razor page we get the error. And I actually do see now why it's get confused, because we also now have a post.razor, so I don't know if it should use the post.cs or the post.razor. Right now it tried to use the post.razor instead. So I think the most simple solution is just to go and say that the post in here should be the post that we have inside our data folder. And this is the way that you want to specify more clearly where should it take the model from. But now let's try to go back to our post page, and then let's try to run it. So now we can also see that it makes it to a link, the text like a link. We will of course go and not do that, so we will remove the underline and the blue default color. But the first thing I will do was to go and check this URL here, so we can go and copy it. And if we go inside our database, we can see that we have the ID of 1, 2, and 3. So let's just see if we can fetch the number 1 article. And we cannot. And it looks like that there is something that is a string that it cannot convert to a int. So if we go back, we actually need to say column and then say that this should be handled as an int. So now let's try and close it and open the application again. So now let's try to enter the article again. And now we have the post number 1. So what this means is that we actually do not have the information from the post yet, but we can target number 1 now. And that makes it possible to go in and say that we just want to target the specific ID and get that ID from the database. So now we can close this window again. And again, let's just go and make these a lower case instead. This should still work, but now we can go to our index.razor file and I will actually just go and copy and paste all the code section and also the usings so that we can paste it in here. And then let's grab the parameter to put it inside the same code section, and let's remove the empty code. So this is the easiest way, I think, just to reuse the code so we don't have to write all this again, because we're actually just going to make some small changes to this. We still want to use the folder, the data folder. We also want to use the iConfiguration because we are feeding that to the app.db context. The only extra thing we have now is the actual ID of the post that we want to display on this page. So I think the thing we will do now is just to go to the post here, and then we actually just want to say where, and then we want to use the lambda expression. So we just say x and then equal to, and then the greater than, and then we say that the x dot ID should be equal to our ID. And then we don't want to have this to be a list because it's actually just one post. So what we can do is to say first or default, and now it's give us an error, but that is because our posts is actually a list, so we don't want to have that. We just want to say that it should be a post, and let's just say that this is a post so we don't have multiple posts. So right now we should be able to go and create some HTML. Let's make a container and then show what the post is that we retrieve from the database. So we're going to create a div, and this should also have a class of container, and we don't want to make the C there. And then I actually think we just display the image now. So source, and again, I don't know why it doesn't see the image folder, but if we just go to the index page, we can just go and copy and paste this whole line. So this is the image now, and I also want to have it to be a width of 100, so it's okay. Then we will create a h1, which should be the post, and we have a title. I then want to create a h3 maybe, because we in here just want to have the introduction text. I want to use the paragraph tag so that we have the post dot body text. So by doing this, we should be set up. We can go and delete these two. And let's try to see how this looks. So again, we want to go and target the article, and let's say that we want to get the number 1 article, so it's this one. And now we have a big image, and we have our title, the introduction text, and then the article. So now when this is actually working, we can go to the front page, and then the next thing is that we just want to have these to work so that when we click on them, we actually come to the article. So let's go and close the application and go to the index.razor, because then instead of say href to this, then we actually want to do it to the article, and then just the number of the article. So in this case it will be post, and then say ID. And let's go and see if this works. So let's try to click on the first article, and now you can see we actually come inside this article. So if we click on the Power of Gratitude article, we also now display this article. In some blogs, including my own, we actually have a section at the side, so the post is not actually fill up 100% of the container. As you can see on my own blog, when we click an article, you can see that the article is maybe taking up, I don't know, maybe 9 in the width of the columns when we use Bootstrap, and then the last 3 is over here to display something else. In this case it is some ads, and a ad that says that I have a section for learning C#. You could also go and take a picture of yourself and then a description so people know who you are. That is actually an idea I think I will soon implement on my blog. But let's go back. So what we want to do is just to say that the article should be in a column with a width of, let's say, 9. And then we also have a column with the width of 3. This will also automatically make this image a little bit smaller so that it's not that high. So let's close it. And inside our post.razor file, we can go and say that we want to have a div with a class of row. And then again, we want to have a div with a class of column. And in this case, we will say 9. And let's just go and copy and paste this, and then say that the size should be 3. So now we can go and take all the information on our post, clip it out, and put it inside the column 9. and just align it so that it looks a little bit better. So let's try to open it now and see how it looks. And let's just click on one of the articles. And now you can see it looks a little bit better because the image is not that high. And we actually get the title so that we can see it. And as you might notice, this article is not so reading friendly. It's actually just what we would call a wall of text. And I basically think what we will do now is to go and make it a little bit prettier, everything. Also this text, we need to remember if we rescale this, it will also rescale the image. So it's actually pretty responsive already. So I think the only thing we need to change is just this text so it looks a little bit better. So let's close it and let's go to our index page. So I think the easiest way to target these is just to go and create a new class here. And let's call this for post front page. And let's go and copy this so that we can go and open our CSS folder. And we need to open the site.css. We then want to scroll down to the bottom. And then we can include our new class and open and closing brackets also. And I actually don't want to target this specifically. I want to target the h1 that we have inside it. And I also want to copy and paste it so we can target the paragraph inside. So let's try to say that we want to have a font size of maybe 20 pixels, and let's copy and paste it to the paragraph, which should be a little bit less because let's say that should be 15. We also want to set the font weight so that it's bold, and let's try to set the color so that it's black, and also the color at the paragraph. I don't know if this will work because maybe we have to target the anchor tag, but let's go and run this now. And it actually did work. So it's black now, but we still have the underline. And then I actually think that we could make the headlines a little bit bigger. So the nice thing about Blazor is that we actually don't have to close the application now. We can just go to Visual Studio. And as you can see, if I change this to red, for example, and just save the file, then if we go back, it will instantly be red. So when it comes to the CSS, you don't really have to close and open the browser window all the time. But we want to make this black, and the font size, let's set it to 40 instead. And to remove the underline, we have to say text decoration should be set to none, and also on the paragraph. So now I saved it, and let's go and see how it looks. And we can see it actually not disappeared from here. So if we hit F12, we can go and inspect the element and see why. And as we can see, I think maybe it's because that we really have to target the anchor tag instead, because it is going through right here. It says text decoration none, but because we don't have to use the underline anywhere on our page, I will actually just go to our CSS here and then say that all anchor tag should have text decoration of none. So now let's see if this works. And now you can see it will be gone, and it will be gone for all anchor tags on the page. So if I really want to include it somewhere, I can just say add a specific anchor tag that I want to use the underline. But let's close down the dev tool. So I want to show you a little trick also. Because if you see now, when we make it small, so this would be like on a phone, you can see that it will just align at the left side the image, and then the right side the text. But I think it would look prettier if we have the image above instead. And that's actually because I never told Bootstrap when to actually break the layout, so that when we come under a certain width, it should just be placed above each other, all the columns. And the way we can do that is by going to the index file, and instead of say column and then 4, then say column, and let's say when it's small, then it should break. So we can do it like this. And I think we need to close the application now, and then let's open it again. And as you can see now, I think this looks much better. If you have a phone, it would now be the image above and then the rest of the article. And if we make this a little bit wider, you can see that it will turn back to the original layout. So I think we have the bare bone of what a blog should contain. You can always make this much nicer. You could have one article at the top that would just stand out because it's the newest one maybe, and then have these being a little bit smaller, but I think we need to go into the post and then also work a little bit with this layout, and at last I want to work with this. So let's go back to Visual Studio, and this time it is the post page we want to edit. We could again just make a overall article class, but because we have the body text in here and I want to do something with it later on, I actually just want to create a class for the title specific and for the introduction. So let's go and say class and then say post title, and also a new class for the introduction, so say post introduction. And let's go and copy and paste this to our CSS file, and also the post introduction. And we could maybe just reuse some of the other code we made here, so just go and paste that in. So we make it 40 in size and we make it bold, and also take this one to make it 15. And I actually do want to make this color maybe gray. So let's try to see how that looks. And I don't think it took effect, and that is also because when we set a class in our post.razor page, then we actually need to hot reload it before we can see the changes. You could also just go and close it and turn it on again, but let's try to hot reload it. And when we go back, we can see this tick now, and you can see it's updated. In some cases, when you have some bigger changes, the hot reload will not work, but when you have some smaller changes like this, then it will work. I just want to create some padding also to this, so it looks a little bit better. So let's go into the CSS file and then say that we should have a padding of, let's say, 20 pixels. And the same for the introduction text. And let's hot reload it again. And I think maybe there's too much space now between this and this. So what we want to do is in our padding, we want to say, I think if you do this at the first, then it's the left side. And then you will specify the top. And then you will specify the right side. And then you will specify the bottom. So if we look at this again, you can see I actually think I was not right in that. I think we need to make this 0 and this 20, and that actually did it. So this is the top, the right, the bottom, and the left side. And I still think that there is a little bit too much space between them, so I want to do the same with the title, but in this case it should just be the bottom where there's no margin, and maybe we actually just have to set it to 10, so we have a little bit. So let's save the file, and I think it looks much better now. But as you can see, we have this wall of text inside our article or inside our post. And I actually think that there is many ways you can handle this, but I think the most powerful way that you can handle this is actually by making this HTML. Of course, if you are working on a project where you're going to make a blog for a customer, you don't want to do that because your customer don't know how to set HTML tags on text and how to put paragraphs on and also decorate it with CSS. So in that case, you might want to do it in another way. You might have to create a whole text editor to the person that is going to create the article, where the text editor is so smart that it knows when it is a paragraph and not, and then make it to HTML. I think there must be some smart software to do that already. But the way I will go around this is to actually create this text with HTML tags on it and then tell Blazor to display it like it was HTML, or actually handle it as it was HTML. It should not display the tags, but actually go and execute the tags instead, so that we get some paragraphs, we get some links, and whatever you have in your post. I actually know that in one of the articles here, I think it's this one. Okay, now I cannot find the specific place, but I actually had a list inside one of the articles, which also could be nice to display just as an unordered list or a ordered list. But if I go back to ChatGPT, where I created these articles, then you can see right here, I said that it should generate a post with 2000 letters, and it should display the title and intro text and then the post. And as you can see here, when I got the post, I can then go and copy all this, and I actually think we can just say to ChatGPT that we want to have some HTML tags around it. So let's go and say, please put some HTML tags around this text. and then paste in the text, and let's see what it does now. So I'll scroll down to the bottom, and now you can see it actually did exactly what I want. I want to have a paragraph tag on each paragraph, and then also the unordered list should have a UL and a LI tag for every list item in the list. So now when that is generated, we can just go and copy it, and let's put it into our database. And I think it was this article. So now I just pasted in the new text, and let's hit enter. So if we go back to the blog now, and let's refresh this, you can see that we now have all the tags, but we really don't want to show these tags. We want to have that the browser should use the tags. So if we go back to our application, we can go into our post.razor file, and in here where we say body text, we do want to say that this is actually a markup string, and we need to close it off. So now we should say that this is a markup string, and it should handle it as it was marked up with HTML. So let's try to run it and see how this looks. And let's go inside our post where we have the HTML, and now you can see it look much better now. Of course, there's still some padding we need to add in the sides, and you will always could play around with the font. It is not that this font is the most fantastic. You can really go and play around with a lot of different fonts. But the last thing I will do is just to go and put some padding so that it fits the title and this intro text. So let's go out, and then we want to copy this class text so that we can go and see post body text. And let's go inside our CSS file so that we can go and include it. And this time I think it will be okay just to say padding 20 pixels. So let's go and say run the application again, and let's go and take our middle post here, and now you can see it fit much better. And I think this is all for this part 1 video, because now we actually created the posts. So in the next videos we're going to see how we can create users so they can log in, and I think that would be a part 2, and a part 3 will be to actually set up so the user can go and create some comment on the posts. And that's actually all I planned right now. I maybe want to run this even further, so let's just see where this ends. But for now, just have a nice day, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.